She thought she had won. That's the part I keep coming back to. She actually thought it was over. I was standing in the kitchen of my house. The house I built from nothing. The house where my kids learned to walk, where my wife spent her last good years before the cancer took her, and my daughter called me on a Tuesday morning to tell me she had sold it. "Dad," she said, and her voice had that tone she gets when she's already decided something and is just waiting for you to catch up. "Trevor and I are leaving for Vancouver Island on Thursday. We've already signed everything. The property's sold." I didn't say anything for a moment. The coffee maker was still dripping. There was a crow sitting on the fence post outside, staring at nothing. "You've sold the farm," I said. "It wasn't practical to keep it, Dad. You're 68 years old. You can't run 200 acres by yourself." We talked about this. We had not talked about this. What we had talked about once 2 Christmases ago, after she'd had too much wine, was whether I had ever considered eventually downsizing. That was the extent of it. I'd said, no, actually, I hadn't considered it. She'd moved on to complaining about the drive from Calgary. That was the whole conversation. "Lauren," I said, "I need you to explain to me very slowly what you mean by signed everything." "Trevor handled it. He knows a buyer. It's a clean deal, Dad. Cash offer. The closing is in 6 weeks. You'll have time to find a place." Trevor. Of course it was Trevor. I'd watched my son-in-law for 11 years and never once trusted the way he smiled when he thought he was getting away with something. He had the kind of confidence that only comes from never having faced real consequences, the kind that mistakes luck for intelligence. "Lauren, I have to go," I said. "Dad, don't be upset. This is the right thing. You can get a nice condo in." I hung up. I stood there in the kitchen for a long time. The crow was still on the fence post. The coffee had finished dripping. Outside the window I could see the east field, the one my father broke with a borrowed tractor in 1963, the one I reseeded every 5 years since I was old enough to drive, the one my wife used to walk through in the evenings when the canola was blooming and the light was going golden. 212 acres of black Alberta soil that had been in this family for over 60 years. My daughter had sold it. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that she couldn't. I want to go back a little, because the story doesn't make sense without the context, and I've never been a man who skips steps. My name is Robert Haynes. I was born in Leduc, Alberta in 1956. My father farmed. His father farmed before him. When I was 32, I took over the operation after my dad's first heart attack, and I spent the next 3 decades turning a modest grain operation into something that actually worked. Canola, wheat, a small cow-calf operation in the early years before I sold the herd to focus on crops. By the time I was in my late 50s, the land was worth just over $3 million and completely paid off. My wife Eleanor passed in 2019. Pancreatic cancer. 14 weeks from diagnosis to the end. We had 2 children, Lauren, who is 41, and my son Kevin, who is 38 and lives in Saskatoon with his wife, and my 3 grandchildren, and who I'll get to later because Kevin matters in this story in a way that I didn't anticipate. After Eleanor died, I went through a period, I'll call it a period, though my doctor called it a depressive episode, where I stopped taking care of things the way I should have. Not the farm. The farm I kept running because the farm was something I understood. But the other things, the financial things, the paperwork, the accounts. I let Lauren help me because she asked and I was tired and I didn't have the energy to manage it alone. That was my mistake. That was the door I left open. Lauren had power of attorney. I gave it to her in the fall of 2021 when I had a health scare, a blood clot in my leg, nothing fatal, but it put me in the hospital for 10 days, and I wanted someone to be able to handle things if something happened. She was the older child. She lived closer. It made sense at the time. Trevor knew about the power of attorney. He'd always been more interested in my financial situation than I was comfortable with, but I put it down to him being a real estate agent, that particular professional habit of calculating the value of every room you stand in. He knew what the land was worth. He knew I had no mortgage. He knew I suspect that I was a lonely old man who had handed his daughter a document that gave her the legal authority to act on my behalf. What Trevor did not know, what he could not have known, because I never told anyone, was what I had done 18 months earlier. In the spring of 2023, I'd had coffee with an old friend of mine, a man I've known since university named Bill McKenzie. Bill had spent his career as an estate lawyer in Edmonton and was now semi-retired, doing occasional consulting work. I'd called him because I was uneasy, not about anything specific, not yet, just uneasy. The way you get uneasy when something doesn't add up, but you can't name the thing that's wrong. I told Bill about the power of attorney. I told him about Trevor's questions. I told him about the way Lauren talked about the farm sometimes, not with affection, with impatience, like it was a problem to be solved. Bill listened to all of it, drank his coffee, and then set the cup down and said, "Robert, do you want to protect the farm, or do you want to just hope for the best?" I said I wanted to protect it. We spent 3 months working on it. What we put in place was a combination of things. First, I revoked the general power of attorney and replaced it with a limited one, much narrower in scope, tied only to medical decisions. I did not tell Lauren. Second, Bill helped me transfer the farm property into a family trust, the Haynes Family Trust, with myself as trustee and my 2 children as beneficiaries, but with specific language that made it impossible to sell, mortgage, transfer the land without the written consent of both beneficiaries and the trustee. Me. Third, we filed everything properly with Alberta land titles. The title to my farm was no longer in my name alone. It was held in trust. Any sale required my signature, and the power of attorney Lauren held couldn't override the trust. Trevor had done his research on the wrong document. When I called Bill the morning after Lauren's phone call, he wasn't surprised. "Has she actually found a buyer?" he asked. "Apparently. Cash offer. Closing in 6 weeks. Who's the buyer?" I didn't know. That part took me a few days to find out, and when I did, I had to sit down. The buyer was a numbered company, 1847293 Alberta Limited. And when Bill's assistant traced the incorporation documents, one of the directors was Trevor's brother. They had set up a company to buy my land at what I later confirmed was roughly 40% below market value, with the intention of flipping it within 2 years once a proposed highway expansion nearby drove prices up. They had known about the highway expansion because Trevor had a client on the county planning committee. They weren't just trying to take my farm. They were trying to use insider information to profit from taking my farm. Bill said, "Robert, this isn't just a family dispute anymore." He was right. We called the RCMP the next day. I need to tell you about the 2 weeks between that phone call and what happened next, because those 2 weeks were the hardest part. Not because I was afraid, I was past afraid by then, but because I had to keep acting like I didn't know. Lauren called me 3 more times. Each time I picked up and let her talk, let her explain how this was all for my benefit, how I was getting older, how the farm was too much, how I could use the money to travel, to have experiences, to not be alone out there in that big house. I listened. I said, and I see in the right places. I did not say, I know about the numbered company. I did not say, I know about Trevor's brother. I did not say, I know you've been filing documents against a title your power of attorney cannot touch. What I did instead was drive into Edmonton, meet with Bill, sign some more documents, and sit across from 2 RCMP officers in a very beige office and tell them everything I knew. Trevor, I later learned, had contacted my bank directly, not Alberta Land Titles, which would have immediately shown the trust registration, but my personal bank, and tried to arrange for the proceeds of the sale to be deposited into an account he had co-signatory access to. Another gift from the early days of Eleanor's illness when I'd needed someone to help with bills. He had planned to deposit the money and transfer it before I understood what had happened. He hadn't counted on the sale being legally impossible to complete. He also hadn't counted on the bank's fraud department flagging the unusual request and quietly notifying the RCMP, which was why the investigation was already underway before Bill and I even made our call. On a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after Lauren had told me, the farm was sold, almost to the day of the closing date they had set. My daughter called me again. I was actually out in the East Field, the canola field, walking the rows the way I do every year when the plants are at knee height and the weather has been good. The phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. "Dad?" Her voice was different this time. The confidence was gone. Something underneath it had given way. "Dad, there are police at the house." "Which house?" I said. "Our house, in Calgary. They have a warrant there." I heard Trevor's voice in the background, sharp and low. Then Lauren again, quieter. "Dad, what did you do?" I looked out across the field. The canola was green and thick. In another 6 weeks it would be yellow, and the bees would come, and it would smell the way it always smells. The way it smelled when Eleanor walked through it. The way it has smelled for 60 years on this land. "I protected what's mine," I said. "That's all I did. I won't pretend it wasn't hard after that. I want to be honest with you because there's no point in telling this story if I'm going to smooth over the parts that hurt." Lauren was charged with fraud over $5,000 and breach of fiduciary duty related to the misuse of the power of attorney. Trevor was charged with fraud over $5,000, conspiracy, and a separate matter related to the insider information, which the RCMP passed along to the Alberta Securities Commission. His brother, the director of the numbered company, was also charged. Kevin called me the night the news got out. He'd heard from a cousin first, then called Lauren, then called me. He was quiet on the phone for a long time before he said, "Dad, I'm sorry I wasn't paying more attention." I told him it wasn't his job to pay attention. It was my job to protect the farm, and I had done it. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said. "Come for harvest if you can bring the kids." He came. All 5 of them, his wife and the 3 grandchildren. My youngest granddaughter, who is 7 and has Eleanor's stubborn red hair, rode in the combine with me for 2 hours and asked me why the fields were so big. And I told her they were big because her great-great-grandfather had worked very hard, and so had every Haynes after him, and that one day some of it might be hers if she wanted it. She said she thought she might want to be a veterinarian instead. I told her that was fine too. The land would be here either way. The legal proceedings took the better part of a year. Lauren's lawyer negotiated a plea arrangement. She avoided a criminal conviction but received a formal reprimand, was required to pay back a substantial portion of the legal fees my estate had incurred, and will not hold power of attorney over any Haynes family assets again. Trevor's case was more serious. His real estate license was suspended pending the outcome of the Securities Commission investigation, and at the time I'm telling you this, the criminal fraud charges are still before the court. I did not forgive them, if that's what you're waiting to hear, not in any formal way. Lauren called me around Christmas, 8 months after everything had come apart, and she cried and said she was sorry and that Trevor had convinced her it was the right thing, that she hadn't understood how serious it was. I listened. I didn't hang up this time, but I also didn't tell her it was fine, because it wasn't fine, and I'm 68 years old, and I'm done saying things I don't mean to keep the peace. What I said was, "I know you're sorry. I hope that's true. But there are things you can't unsay, Lauren. There are things you can't undo." And I need you to understand that what you tried to take from me wasn't just land. It was your mother's land. It was your grandfather's land. It was 60 years of this family's work. And you let your husband treat it like a stock tip. She was quiet for a very long time after that. I'm not telling you this story because I want your sympathy or because I want you to be angry on my behalf. I'm telling it because I spent a long time feeling like the world was moving too fast for me, like I was already becoming the kind of old man that people make decisions around instead of with. I let myself believe that handing over a piece of paper meant handing over control, and for a while I acted like those were the same thing. They're not. The farm is still here. The east field is sitting under about 8 inches of snow right now, and in 4 months it will be seeded again, and in 6 months it will be knee-high and green. The crow is still on the fence, post most mornings. Eleanor's rose bushes by the back door need to be cut back in the spring, same as always. I am 68 years old and I am not done yet, not by a long way.